If this were humanity's last symbol of hope, how would you react? Imagine the Statue of Liberty, no longer the imposing postcard that always represented freedom and victory, but a shadow of itself, partially destroyed, shrouded in thick smoke, and surrounded by alien spaceships hovering in the New York sky. The scene is almost unreal, but it is precisely in this contrast between the familiar and the devastated that the unease that grips us is born. We are not talking about just a monument in ruins, but a collective symbol on the brink of collapse. And what you will discover now may surprise you. The story of this last stand is not just about broken stones or twisted metal, but about ordinary people who became extraordinary in the face of apocalypse. As the city burned, military personnel, civilians, and scientists united in a desperate effort to turn the fall into a chance for survival. You might be wondering, what would it be like to live through that moment? The answer may not be simple, but that's precisely where the power of this narrative lies. Stay with me until the end, and you'll understand how every detail of this confrontation at the Statue of Liberty carries more than destruction. It carries choices, fears, and sacrifices that define the fate of humanity. Imagine what it would mean to see the city that never sleeps plunged into silence, broken only by the roar of explosions and the metallic sound of alien machines. It's a scenario where science fiction blends with the darkest reality, and where each survivor is forced to decide between fighting or hiding. Have you ever experienced this? Of course, not literally, but we've all faced moments when the ground seems to crumble, and we need to find strength in symbols, ideas, or even people who inspire us to resist. This is the essence that transforms this episode of Alien Invasion into something so close to our own experience. The struggle not to give up when all seems lost. Around the mutilated statue, soldiers improvised barricades, civilians sought refuge in underground tunnels, and scientists deciphered mysterious signals in hopes of turning the tide. This isn't just fiction, it's a reflection of human resilience when faced with the impossible. And on this battlefield, the line between heroes and victims blurred, as even those who had never considered taking up arms now saw themselves as part of something greater. What was at stake wasn't just the defense of a territory, but the preservation of humanity's very identity in the face of a seemingly invincible enemy. As the ships projected energy beams over skyscrapers and the streets turned into mazes of smoke, a certainty spread among those who resisted. Every minute gained beside the statue was another minute of hope. This hope wasn't just political or military, but deeply emotional. After all, when a monument falls, what remains is the collective memory, the spirit of unity that insists on not being extinguished. And perhaps that's precisely why the Statue of Liberty became the perfect stage for the last stand. It wasn't just a ruined hunk of iron and copper. It was a silent call for all survivors to cling to the idea that there was still something to fight for. What you'll see from now on is more than a tale of destruction. It's the revelation of the human stories hidden behind the flames and rubble. Soldiers who risked everything, families who united against fear, brilliant minds who challenged the unknown. And each of them, in their own way, showed that even in the midst of the apocalypse, survival depends not only on strength, but on the ability to believe. And this is where our journey begins. Because the statue's fall didn't mark the end, but rather opened a new chapter in the struggle for survival. What follows will transport you even deeper into this epic landscape, where the aftermath of the alien invasion reveals not only destruction, but also the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Amidst this scenario of chaos and resistance, it's impossible not to consider how each person, faced with an extreme situation, would react uniquely. Some would choose to fight to the end, others would seek to protect their loved ones, and some might find strength they never knew they had. And this is where I want to open up space for you to be part of this story too. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what has touched you most so far, what your reaction would be to a world overrun by an alien invasion. Your vision can inspire others watching, and together, we can build a true community of imaginary survivors, but with very real feelings. And if you're enjoying this journey, don't forget to like the video. It seems like a simple gesture, but each like shows that this content is valuable and deserves continued production. And when you subscribe to the channel, you're saying you want to keep following these stories, exploring new scenarios, and delving even deeper into this universe of science fiction and apocalyptic survival. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people who also love this kind of narrative. Because in the end, it's not just about watching a story, it's about sharing experiences, creating connections, and keeping the flame of something bigger than ourselves alive. And as we continue to delve into this dark chapter of the resistance at the Statue of Liberty, it's clear that what comes next will bring even more intense revelations about the true weight of human choices amidst the impossible. From the beginning of its existence, the Statue of Liberty was not just an imposing monument overlooking New York Harbor. She always carried with her a greater message, the promise of freedom, the idea of unity, and the dream that, no matter how difficult the journey, there was a place where hope could flourish. For over a century, millions of people arriving by ship saw her as the first sign of new life, of a possible new beginning. Now imagine the symbolic weight of seeing this same beacon of hope transformed into a target of destruction during an alien invasion. It wasn't just copper being ripped apart by energy beams. It was as if the heart of an entire nation was being put to the test before the enemy. The emotional impact of this scenario is enormous because the statue was never just a sculpture. It was shaped as a gift laden with meaning, representing victory over oppression and belief in a better future. Therefore, when the first attacks devastated New York, many believed that if the statue held out, there would still be a chance of survival. The last line of defense wasn't limited to underground bunkers or hidden military arsenals. It centered on the idea that protecting this symbol was protecting one's own collective identity. Defending the statue was, in a way, defending what was left of humanity. It's interesting to note how, in moments of extreme crisis, symbols acquire an almost spiritual power. The flame the statue holds aloft with its torch became, in the eyes of the survivors, a reminder that even in the face of darkness, there was always a point of light to follow. That's why so many civilians, soldiers, and even scientists gathered around it. Not because it was the safest place, but because it was the place where it made the most sense to fight. The human mind seeks reference points when everything seems in ruins, and the Statue of Liberty became this psychological beacon in the midst of the apocalypse. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic. Consider for a moment how our mindset changes in the face of seemingly unbearable situations. What keeps a person standing when the world around them is crumbling? Often it's not the cold logic of survival, but rather the need to believe in something greater than themselves. This was the driving force that drove so many to risk their lives to remain in that burning territory. It was as if the statue acted as an emotional portal, connecting the survivors to what made them human. Faith in unity, the strength of hope, and the courage to face the impossible. The revelations emerging from this moment show us that, even in the darkest of scenarios, humanity is driven by symbols. The hidden truth is that they weren't just fighting aliens. They were fighting to maintain their very essence, to maintain destruction of what represented generations of achievements and dreams. The statue's fall would mean not only the enemy's victory, but the psychological collapse of all those still resisting. Therefore, each attack on that monument was received as a collective wound, and each remaining piece was seen as a victory that could not be ignored. This impact wasn't limited to those in New York. News and images transmitted by clandestine radio stations, surviving drones, and even amateur footage circulated throughout the ruined world. People in other devastated cities saw the statue as a last bastion, a sign that organized resistance still existed. This long-distance connection strengthened groups fighting elsewhere, creating an invisible network of hope. It was as if, by remaining standing, even mutilated, the statue silently shouted to the planet, "It's not over yet." Behind the scenes of this struggle, many personal stories began to emerge. Soldiers who had never set foot in New York reported that imagining the statue standing motivated them to continue fighting on distant fronts. Families hiding in makeshift shelters told their children that the Copper Lady still held her torch as a way to calm their fear. The journey of these survivors was deeply marked by a symbol that went far beyond its physical presence. It functioned as an emotional bridge, connecting different people, in different contexts, by the same will to keep breathing. This phenomenon shows us how collective decisions are shaped not only by military strategy, but by the power of what inspires us. Resistance wasn't just about improvised cannons or barricades built from rubble. It was, above all, about the mindset of not giving up. When a community finds a symbol that unites it, the impact can transform despair into strength. The truth is that in extreme scenarios, what keeps a society alive isn't just weapons, but the ability to find common ground and belief. With each attack, the statue became more fragile, but at the same time more powerful as a symbol. Paradoxically, the more destroyed it was, the more the emotional strength it radiated grew. This contrast generated in the survivors an almost irrational determination to carry on, because when you realize that such a powerful enemy wants to destroy something that symbolizes your identity, you begin to see in this gesture confirmation that it has immense value. It was as if the aliens, by attacking the statue, were indirectly saying, "We know this is your heart," and humanity responded, "Then this is where we will resist until the end." This is the hidden power of symbols. They transcend matter. They become fuel for impossible journeys, invisible foundations that sustain millions of people. And that is precisely why the Statue of Liberty was chosen as the final point of resistance. Not because it was the most strategic location, but because it was the most significant. It represented the line that, if crossed, would mean the definitive collapse not just of a city, but of all human hope. And given this understanding, I want to leave you with a small mission. Comment on a word that sums up what this symbol awakens in you. It could be hope, resistance, or even freedom. I want to see if this flame still beats as strongly within you as it did for those who fought in the face of imminent downfall. Now that we understand the magnitude of this symbol and how it became a catalyst for collective strength, it's time to delve into the consequences of this scenario and the stories that arose around it. When the sky began to darken eerily, many thought it was just another summer storm approaching New York Bay. But it soon became clear that these were no heavy clouds. They were shadows cast by something gigantic, metallic structures that seemed to swallow the sunlight and that, little by little, revealed their colossal form. Alien ships so immense they made skyscrapers seem like tiny toys in comparison. The city, accustomed to the constant sounds of horns, sirens, and planes streaking across the sky, plunged into an almost unbearable silence, broken only by the low hum emitted by those machines suspended in the air. It was a sound vibrating in the chest, as if each heartbeat had been replaced by a reminder that something beyond human comprehension was about to happen. The first attacks were not long in coming. Energy beams sliced across the horizon like incandescent blades, reducing entire buildings to rubble in a matter of seconds. The glass towers that reflected the sun were engulfed in explosions, releasing a wave of thick smoke that spread through the streets like a pall of despair. It was impossible to fathom the technology employed by those ships. There were no visible engines, no conventional weapons. Each shot seemed to come from a hidden truth, something that defied all earthly logic. And, faced with this terrifying spectacle, the most iconic city on the planet was reduced to ashes in mere moments. The military attempted to react, but the initial collapse of the defense was inevitable. Jets flew over Manhattan in a desperate attempt to stem the advance, but disappeared within seconds, shot down by an attack system that could neither be tracked nor predicted. Tanks were positioned at strategic points, only to be pulverized before even firing a single shell. It was as if every human movement was already anticipated by a far superior intelligence, capable of calculating every decision before it was even made. The feeling was not just of impotence, but of humiliation before an enemy that needed no effort to win. Meanwhile, chaos reigned in the streets. People ran in all directions, some seeking shelter in subway stations, others fleeing in cars that ended up stuck in dead-end traffic jams. What were once avenues lit by colorful signs became corridors of smoke and flames. Children cried, clinging to their parents, and amid the panic, it was impossible to distinguish who still had the strength to fight and who had already surrendered to fear. The invasion was not only physical but also psychological. The survivors knew there was no turning back. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what truly marks the arrival of these invaders is not just the visible destruction, but the invisible impact on the collective mindset. When an entire city realizes, in a matter of minutes, that everything it believed to be indestructible could crumble, a transformation takes place within the people. It's as if a veil were torn away, revealing a fragility that had always been there, but had never been confronted so brutally. The symbols of human progress, the skyscrapers, the bridges, the historic landmarks, suddenly proved fragile in the face of a force that could not be explained with science or known weapons. The revelations that emerged from that moment were not in history books, but in the eyes of those who survived the first impact. Some spoke of resignation, others of revolt, but all carried the same awareness. From then on, every decision would be a choice between giving up or resisting. This is the true backstage of the invasion. The scene we see from the outside is composed of explosions and ruins, but inside what was being constructed was a new way of thinking, a mindset shaped by urgency, by the need to find meaning amidst the chaos. The alien offensive brought with it more than destruction. It brought an existential shock. Many wondered, why us? Was there a hidden motive for the attack? Some hidden truth about humanity that justified the arrival of these beings? Or was it simply a cruel game of cosmic power in which we became the weakest piece on the board? The fact is that with each shot, each explosion, each collapsing building, the realization grew that survival would depend on something greater than weapons or earthly technology. A new strength would need to be found, perhaps in unity, perhaps in the very instinct to preserve what was left. As the city burned, the first pockets of resistance emerged in unexpected places. Makeshift groups helped the wounded, formed barricades with debris, and shared information about escape routes. Even amidst the destruction, there were signs of solidarity that showed humanity would not surrender easily. And it is precisely this contrast between the brutality of the invasion and the spontaneous courage of ordinary people that makes this moment so remarkable. What was at stake was not just the defense of a city, but the preservation of something much deeper, the human essence. This was just the beginning of a journey that would bring even more intense revelations, because the arrival of the invaders was not an isolated event, but the turning point that would forever change the way humanity sees itself in the universe. The first military units to regroup amidst the chaos found an almost symbolic rallying point in the Statue of Liberty area, a territory that needed to be defended at all costs. Damaged tanks were repositioned as makeshift barricades, burned-out civilian vehicles served as barriers, and chunks of concrete ripped from the ground became makeshift trenches. There was no war manual capable of guiding these men and women facing such a superior enemy. Every decision was made in the heat of the moment, guided more by instinct than by any tested strategy. Still, there was a collective effort to form a line of resistance, however fragile, if only to buy a few extra minutes. It was a painful contrast to observe. Seasoned soldiers, trained to deal with any kind of ground threat, now reduced to planning almost artisanal ambushes against war machines that followed no known logic. Conventional weapons seemed insignificant. Grenades were swallowed by invisible energy fields, and even the heaviest artillery rounds ricocheted as if hitting an indestructible wall. But even faced with this state of helplessness, what could be seen in the eyes of these fighters was not surrender, but rather the awareness that, in some way, they were writing the last page of a people's history. The psychological shock was devastating. Many reported feeling like they were fighting against a fate already sealed, as if each attack were merely a desperate attempt to delay the inevitable. The victory mentality, so ingrained in military training, was replaced by a kind of courageous acceptance, fighting even though the chance of success was slim. Some would call this irrationality, but in truth, it was a silent transformation. War, at that point, was no longer just about winning, but about resisting, about proving that even when everything pointed to collapse, there was still the strength to rise. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what was at stake was not just the physical confrontation, but the emotional impact of facing an enemy that showed no weakness, gave no openings, had no face. Fighting humans is an experience that, however harsh, still allows for some level of understanding. There is strategy, there are flaws, there are motivations that can be deciphered, but fighting an alien invader was like trying to break through an invisible wall, where every action seemed already predicted. This undermined not only confidence but also sanity. Many soldiers described feeling trapped in an endless nightmare, where the only way to move forward was to shut off the future and focus solely on the next second. The revelations emerging from this scenario were brutal. The hidden truth, which no one wanted to admit aloud, was that this battle would not be won on the military field. Yet, everyone remained steadfast. It was as if each soldier had made a silent decision. Even if defeat was certain, they would fight so that every minute gained could serve as hope for someone. It was the belief that their sacrifice would have an impact beyond the line of fire, inspiring civilians, scientists, and anyone who still believed that a future was possible. Behind the scenes of this resistance, stories emerged that would never appear in official reports. Some wrote hurried letters on scraps of paper torn from school notebooks, leaving farewell messages that might never reach their recipients. Others recorded voice messages on damaged radios, attempting to convey not orders, but memories, and some simply remained silent, staring at the partially destroyed statue as if seeking in it the strength to resist fear. These small actions revealed a truth that often goes unnoticed. War is made of weapons, but resistance is made of people. This military journey facing the impossible shows us how the human mind reacts when the logic of victory disappears. Instead of collapsing completely, many found a new form of strength, fighting not for the result, but for meaning. This internal transformation spread like a flame, infecting not only the soldiers, but also the civilians who watched closely. It was the birth of a new collective mentality, in which every second gained was celebrated as a symbolic victory. And, paradoxically, it was precisely this awareness of imminent defeat that fueled an almost superhuman courage. The impact of this echoed far beyond the battlefield. People hidden in underground tunnels heard the echoes of the explosions and interpreted each resistance as a sign that it wasn't the end yet. Children hugging their mothers asked if the soldiers were still there, and a simple affirmative answer was enough to rekindle hope. The behind the scenes of this struggle wasn't measured by how many enemies were killed, but by how many people still believed it was worth resisting. This was humanity's true secret weapon, the ability to find meaning amid the absurd. And it is precisely at this point that we understand the depth of the military's journey in that apocalyptic scenario. They were not just soldiers in combat, they were living symbols of a determination that transcended any strategy. With each explosion, each fall, each retreat, they reaffirmed an essential truth. It was not just about defending territory, but about protecting the flame of resistance that still burned in human hearts. Right there, I'm on this journey too. If you feel that this struggle, even symbolic, has something to teach us about courage and resilience in the face of the impossible. And while this military front improvised its final strategies, something even deeper began to form among the survivors of different origins, uniting not only forces, but destinies that would intersect in a single purpose. While the military resisted with their improvised strategies and a courage that defied all logic, another group was experiencing a different, but equally intense battle. The civilians, men, women, children, and the elderly, completely unprepared, found themselves in the eye of an impossible war. For many, their last refuge was the underground subway tunnels, dark corridors that had been transformed into makeshift shelters. There, the silence was broken only by the muffled sound of explosions overhead and the suppressed cries of those still trying to process the unfolding tragedy. With each tremor of the walls, the feeling was that even the depths of the earth would not be able to protect them. The Statue of Liberty, even in ruins, was still seen as a meeting point, a symbolic beacon guiding the steps of those venturing amidst the chaos. Many families agreed that if they became separated, they would try to reunite near it, as if the statue were more than a monument, but an invisible link that kept everyone connected. It was common to hear stories of people walking miles amidst the rubble, carrying children, just to reach that devastated space, believing they would have a better chance of survival there. There was no practical logic to it, but there was meaning. And in extreme situations, meaning is what sustains hope. Amidst that landscape, stories of courage blossomed like small flames in the darkness. A young man who, despite being injured, volunteered to guide a group of elderly people to safer shelter. A mother who, without a second thought, turned back to save a child who wasn't hers, lost in the smoke. Ordinary people, without uniforms, without sophisticated weapons, who became unsung heroes. And perhaps, this is the most moving part of an invasion. It reveals the hidden truth we carry within. Amidst the fear, we discover that solidarity can be more powerful than any alien technology, because what truly reveals itself in moments like these is not only human fragility, but also the capacity for transformation in the face of the unexpected. When everything around them collapsed, civilians had to make quick decisions, often without time to think. Decisions that changed not only the immediate course of their lives, but also defined how they would be remembered in the future. choosing to save someone instead of fleeing alone, sharing a piece of bread instead of hoarding it, offering a shoulder to cry on instead of turning a blind eye. These small actions formed an invisible network that kept the flame of humanity burning in the heart of chaos. The background to these journeys was full of contrasts. On one hand, there was paralyzing fear, the feeling that every second could be their last. On the other, there was the almost irrational courage to put oneself at risk for someone they barely knew. This duality showed that the human essence cannot be reduced to survival instinct. There is something beyond, a strength that emerges precisely when logic seems to have disappeared. The impact of this was clear. Even without weapons, without uniforms, without military strategies, these civilians represented resistance in another form, more silent but equally powerful. And the most surprising thing is that in many cases, this solidarity was born between people who, in normal times, might never have met eyes. Strangers became allies. Strangers became family. The alien invasion, for all its brutality, ended up revealing a paradoxical truth. At the bottom of the abyss, there was a possibility of unity. It was as if the common enemy had erased social, cultural, and economic boundaries, placing everyone on equal footing in the need to survive. And this, painful as it was, revealed an unexpected side of humanity, the ability to find purpose even when everything around seemed meaningless. This contrast between fear and solidarity also had a profound psychological effect. Many reported that, despite the constant terror, they felt more alive than ever, precisely because they were connected to something greater than themselves. Each person's journey ceased to be individual and became collective. It was as if each gesture of help was a silent declaration. We are still here. We are still resisting. And this mindset, transmitted from person to person, functioned like an invisible chain that strengthened everyone. With each explosion that shook the city, with each flash of light that illuminated the tunnels, the certainty grew that civilians, with their acts of anonymous courage, were writing an essential part of this history. Because resistance didn't just mean facing the enemy directly. Resistance also meant maintaining care, empathy, and humanity alive. And perhaps this is precisely the most powerful revelation of all. In the midst of destruction, what truly saves us isn't just weapons or strategies, but the ability to reach out to others. In the rubble of New York, while soldiers erected barricades and civilians sought refuge in underground tunnels, another group worked in silence, driven not by force of arms, but by the urgency of knowledge. They were scientists, engineers, technicians, and even students who, by instinct or chance, found each other amidst the chaos. Gathered in makeshift shelters, among destroyed laboratories and abandoned buildings, they formed small cells of scientific resistance. What united them was not the ability to fight on the battlefield, but the conviction that, in the face of an incomprehensible threat, the mind could be the most powerful weapon. The first mission of these groups was to decipher the signals the aliens were transmitting. Many reports spoke of strange frequencies interfering with radios, televisions, and even medical equipment. Some managed to capture and record them on old equipment, trying to find patterns that would reveal some hidden truth about the invaders. They spent entire nights analyzing noises, cross-referencing frequencies, and searching for mathematical connections that might indicate a weakness. There was no time for rigorous scientific methods. It was a race against the clock, where every second could mean the difference between survival and extermination. At the same time, improvised plans to sabotage the ships emerged. Some scientists, with limited access to still intact laboratories, began creating rudimentary devices capable of generating electromagnetic pulses. Others attempted to adapt simple materials, such as car batteries and high-voltage cables, into improvised weapons. These weren't perfect solutions, and many failed in initial tests, but each attempt carried with it something greater, the idea that there was still room for creative fighting. Each improvised explosion, each signal jamming, was seen as a small victory against a seemingly invulnerable enemy. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what these scientists represented went beyond the fight against aliens. They embodied the mindset of transformation, of seeking answers when all seemed lost. While many believed the battle was doomed, they saw in calculations, circuits, and formulas a chance to change the course of history. It was as if every scribble on a makeshift board, every formula written with charcoal on broken walls, was a reminder that humanity still had the capacity to create. This intellectual resilience amidst physical collapse became a spark of hope. The revelations emerging from these backstage areas were intense. Amidst exposed cables and battery-depleted laptops, there were moments of discovery that rekindled the morale of everyone around. A frequency that seemed to briefly destabilize the ship's shields, a calculation that indicated vulnerability in flight patterns, even hypotheses that the invaders relied on centralized command signals. Every detail uncovered, no matter how small, fueled the idea that perhaps the enemy was not as perfect as it seemed. The hidden truth began to reveal itself between the lines of chaotic signals, and it was precisely this realization that kept the scientists moving. The impact of this work wasn't limited to makeshift laboratories. When rumors of these discoveries reached civilians and military personnel, new waves of hope were born. It was as if science, even limited to improvisation, was capable of balancing the scales of war. And it wasn't just about technology, but the mindset behind it. The decision to continue studying amidst collapse showed that humanity hadn't lost the ability to think, to question, to create alternatives. This was, after all, the essence of the human spirit, the refusal to accept the impossible as a final destination. Behind the scenes of this scientific resistance, there were also profound dilemmas. Some questioned whether it was worth continuing to risk lives in dangerous tests, while others argued that each failure was just another step toward a greater revelation. This journey of trial and error demonstrated that science is not just about immediate successes, but about the courage to persist when everything points to failure. And paradoxically, it was this imperfect process that gave the survivors a sense of control, even when faced with a virtually invincible enemy. What was emerging there was a new form of resistance, silent, invisible to most, but decisive for the future. Because if soldiers offered time and civilians offered humanity, scientists offered possibilities. They represented the bridge between the devastated present and a future that could still be conquered. The importance of this intellectual struggle was so great that many began to believe that if there were a way out of the apocalypse, it would come not through weapons, but through minds willing to consider the unthinkable. Right there, science resists. If you also believe that even in the face of chaos, knowledge can be the last flame of hope, capable of transforming history. And as these brilliant minds delved into unimaginable calculations and risks, something even more intense began to happen around the Statue of Liberty itself, where the physical confrontation would reach a level that would forever mark the memory of humanity. The final confrontation around the Statue of Liberty didn't happen as planned. There was no central order, no strategic command capable of coordinating every step. It was, in fact, the inevitable result of the convergence of forces, exhausted military personnel trying to hold their positions, civilians refusing to abandon the symbol that still gave them meaning, and scientists, using improvised cables and unstable devices, seeking a last shot of hope against the alien ships. The island that was once synonymous with tourism and celebration was transformed into a battlefield lit by explosions and cut through by screams, gunfire, and energy beams from the sky. The crossfire was so intense that it seemed impossible to distinguish who was still alive and who had already been consumed by the flames. Every corner, every piece of rubble became a point of resistance. The ground trembled under the weight of the attacks, and the once majestic statue was now nothing more than a twisted husk, its shattered torch now illuminated not by the flame of freedom, but by the flashes of enemy weapons. Yet, amidst the smoke, there were those who rose again and again, even though they were powerless, even though they had no chance. It was a brutal spectacle, but also deeply human. Sacrifices marked every moment of that battle. Soldiers who threw themselves against war machines, knowing they would not return. Civilians who used their own bodies to protect defenseless children. Scientists who remained at makeshift power points until the last second, even knowing their experiments could fail at any moment. Each life given was like a silent cry of resistance, a message to the enemy that humanity would not bow down easily. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the most impactful scene wasn't just the physical destruction of the statue or the overwhelming force of the aliens. It was the symbolic transformation that took place before everyone's eyes. When the statue's arm finally collapsed, when the crown shattered into pieces and the face was lost beneath the rubble, many wept, not just for the monument's fall, but for what it represented. Yet, something unexpected emerged amidst the pain, the understanding that when even monuments fall, humanity survives. This hidden truth permeated the survivors' gaze. They understood that the statue didn't need to remain intact to continue fulfilling its purpose. The impact of its fall was so powerful that it became a collective call. It was as if, in that moment, the symbol had ceased to be made of iron and copper and had become flesh and spirit, inhabiting every person who still breathed. Freedom no longer lay on a pedestal, but in the decision to resist, in the courage to move forward even when there was no visible path. Behind the scenes of this confrontation, reports indicated that even the invaders seemed to hesitate in the face of human might, not because they were physically threatened, but because they realized something they could not destroy: the fighting spirit, the ability to unite for what seemed lost. Humanity, in losing its statue, had gained something the aliens could never comprehend: the ability to transform pain into purpose. The survivors of that night would forever carry the scars of the explosions, the smell of smoke, the echoes of voices never to be heard again. But they would also carry the memory that the last flame of resistance had not been extinguished. Even in ruins, the statue fulfilled its final mission: to prove that hope lies not in stone, but in the human heart. Comment here: hope endures. If you also believe that, even when everything seems to fall apart, there is still something inside us that remains standing. And as the ashes of that battle settled and the city fell silent, a new consciousness began to emerge among the survivors, something that would change not only the way they viewed the invasion, but humanity's very view of itself. New York, once a symbol of modernity and progress, woke up unrecognizable after the confrontation at the Statue of Liberty. Skyscrapers that were once postcards were reduced to skeletons of twisted steel, iconic. Bridges lay in pieces, and streets that once throbbed with life were now corridors of silence covered in ash. The heart of the city that never sleeps had been ripped out, and in its place remained only the memory of a struggle that, though lost in material terms, ignited something invisible and indestructible in the human spirit. The devastation was not limited to the physical space. It also invaded people's minds, inflicting a collective wound that would be felt worldwide. The general, psychological impact was immediate. News of the Statue of Liberty's fall spread through improvised broadcasts, weakened radios, and messages carried on surviving drones. In every corner of the planet, the sight of the statue in ruins struck humanity like a profound blow. It was as if everyone realized, simultaneously, that no symbol was safe. For some, it brought despair and a sense that the end had arrived. But for others, it gave birth to a new mindset. If even the statue could fall, and yet the flame of resistance remained undimmed, then there was still strength to fight elsewhere. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what emerged from the fall was not just pain, but transformation. The survivors began to reinterpret the statue no longer as a monument that needed to remain intact, but as a silent call for each person to become, in themselves, a pillar of resistance. What was once represented in iron and copper now lived in the hearts of those who survived. It was as if the fall had removed the dependence on external symbols and revealed the hidden truth. Humanity doesn't need statues to remain free. It needs the courage of each individual to transform fear into action. In distant communities, where the echoes of the invasion had not yet reached, accounts from survivors in New York fueled hope. Weakened soldiers, traumatized civilians, and exhausted scientists shared not only memories of the destruction, but also the certainty that resistance was worth it. This narrative spread like a seed, awakening in others the idea that the fight was not over. The fall was not the end, but the beginning of a new struggle. This emotional impact was so strong that it began to reshape the decisions of entire communities. People who had previously thought only of hiding began to organize improvised defenses, inspired by the sacrifice seen in New York. Others began to study alternative forms of communication, adapting simple technologies to create networks between survivors. It was a silent but powerful movement, the idea that resistance was not centralized in a single point, but spread to every place where there was a human heart willing to fight. Behind the scenes of this transformation, there were also important revelations about the very nature of humanity. The statue's collapse showed that monuments can fall, but the memory of their meanings is impossible to destroy. This understanding profoundly impacted the collective mindset, leading many, to realize that true freedom lies not in external symbols, but in internal choices. The journey, previously marked by fear of loss, became guided by the decision to continue, even in the face of the impossible. And it's curious to see how, amidst the ruins, small gestures emerged that reinforced this new vision. Groups of children drawing the statue on torn pieces of paper, not to mourn its fall, but to remember that it had resisted until the very end. Survivors writing phrases on destroyed walls, transforming debris into manifestos of hope, and even fallen soldiers finding the strength to smile, even if only for a brief moment, realizing that their struggle had inspired people far beyond the battlefield. This contrast between destruction and rebirth formed the basis of a new collective consciousness. It was as if humanity had finally understood that the fall of a symbol did not represent the fall of what it signified. On the contrary, it showed that when matter disappears, the spirit gains even more strength. This revelation passed from survivor to survivor, planted the certainty that there was still much to be written, much to be lived. Comment here: the fall was not the end. If you also feel that, even in the face of destruction, there is always a possible new beginning. And as this idea spread like wildfire through the wreckage, a new stage approached, revealing not only how the survivors viewed the present, but also how they would choose to shape the future of the resistance. And if you were there, in the last bastion of freedom, what would you do to survive? This question isn't just about an alien invasion, but about how we face moments when everything seems to fall apart. In the face of chaos, we are forced to examine our own strengths, our own choices, and discover how far we're willing to go to protect what matters most. The Statue of Liberty, even in ruins, sent a clear message. Symbols may fall, but the flame of humanity remains lit within each of us. And it's precisely this spark I want to bring to you now. If this story stirred your imagination, sparked some emotion, or even sparked a reflection on courage and resilience, leave your perspective in the comments. For example, write, "I would resist until the end," to show that you've stuck with me this far and that this message resonated with you. Your participation isn't just a detail. It's what transforms this space into a true community. When you comment, like, and engage, you're not just interacting with the video, you're helping this message reach more people who, like you, are interested in stories that blend fiction, emotion, and reflections on what it means to be human. Each comment is like a spark that keeps this flame alive and ensures we can continue exploring new narratives, new worlds, and new ways of seeing ourselves together. So tell me, faced with this invasion, faced with the fall of such a powerful symbol, what would you do? How would you react? This is the time to share your perspective and let it be known that you, too, are part of this journey. Because, after all, this isn't just a story told by me. It's an experience that becomes complete when you join the conversation. And the most fascinating thing is that this reflection doesn't end here. On the contrary, it expands with each new interpretation, with each new voice that decides to join this dialogue. What follows is just another chapter in this collective quest to understand how humanity reinvents itself when faced with the impossible.